Welcome back, everybody, to the New York Knicks, my NBA franchise here on NBA 2K23. Today, we have made it to the 2026 NBA Draft. In the last episode, we had our draft preview. We went over the draft lottery, and we ended up getting the number one pick from the Chicago Bulls. But we did not get the Toronto pick because it was top 5 protected. It was originally projected to be the 9th pick, but the Raptors ultimately jumped into the top 4. So we're not going to get that pick, but we will get it unprotected in 2027, which is similar to what happened with the Bulls pick last year, and obviously that worked out quite well for us, considering we now have the number one pick. And we're in an interesting spot here because there are legitimately 3 players at the top of this draft who are worthy of being the number one pick, but we are also a contending team, and I have made it very clear that I would like to add a second superstar, and the number one pick is a really good trade asset to try to get a guy who can complement Jason Tatum long term. So we've got a very tough decision on our hands today, which is ultimately going to really make or break the future outlook of this team, and we've got to be really smart with what we do. We have plenty of trade assets in terms of players and draft picks, so we can really go after almost anybody we want. There's a lot of good options across the NBA of star players who could be available. We were hoping maybe Zion Williamson would, but after winning the NBA championship this year, it seems like he's going to re-sign in New Orleans once his contract is up. So realistically, with Zion off the table, there are still plenty of good options. The Dallas Mavericks are imploding. They are the one team who had a worse record this year than the Bulls, and Luka Doncic is going to be entering the last year of his contract. So presumably, he's trying to get out of there. And if the Mavericks are smart, especially with the lack of picks they have, they should try to get whatever they can for Luka now. The problem is they have no interest in trading him whatsoever. So realistically, that's not going to happen. I think Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker are much more realistic options. Both the Suns and the Timberwolves made the playoffs this year, but I don't think either of these teams have a great future outlook. We'll start with Phoenix. They won 44 games. They lost in the first round to Seattle. Kevin Durant is a free agent. He is regressing. He's likely gone. And other than Johnny Conchery and Ben Simmons, there aren't many pieces on this team who are locked up long term. So I think the Suns are kind of going to implode a little bit. And with Devin Booker entering the final year of his contract, you would think maybe he tries to get out of there and Phoenix gets what they can for him while building around Simmons and Conchery going forward. As for Minnesota, they were the 8th seed and they beat Houston in the first round, which was a major shock before losing to New Orleans in the second round. Their roster is in kind of a similar spot to Phoenix. They've got some key free agents with Anthony Simons and Rudy Gobert. Karl Anthony Towns is getting older and getting worse, and there aren't many good long-term pieces on this team other than Alonzo Corbett and Jaden McDaniels. Out of Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker, I would probably prefer Edwards. He's younger, he's better, he is an ascending superstar, whereas Devin Booker has not been an all-star for the last 3 years, and I'm not sure if he's ever going to get back to that level he once was. We don't have a lot of players we can technically trade right now, but realistically, if this was the real NBA, we would be allowed to trade players who are on team options. So we're going to pretend with some of these players who are technically not under contract, but they have team options. So what would a trade for Anthony Edwards look like? I think throwing Kyle Anderson into the deal makes sense as well. I think he'd be a good fit for our roster, and the Timberwolves aren't really going to need him. I think realistically this is going to start with the number one pick. A player of Anthony Edwards' caliber, there's no way that we would be able to keep the number one pick here realistically. As for the players who we would have to throw in as well, we're going to have to give up a lot. So in the offseason preview episode, I talked about a potential return for a star-level player. Realistically, we're going to have to trade one of these two guards, Coco Diablo or DJ Ramses. I'm not throwing Cesar DiCarlo into that discussion because I don't think he has as much trade value as either of these two players. So which guy is going to complement Anthony Edwards more, and which player makes more sense for Minnesota? I think Coco Diablo being in this deal makes the most sense for both sides. DJ Ramses is someone who can run the point guard position for our offense, and the Timberwolves really like Coco Diablo's two-way ability. He averaged 13 and 5.5 this year on really good shooting splits. He plays good defense and was very solid in the playoffs. Patrick Feinstein would also make sense. He's a combo forward entering the final year of his contract, but he's a high-energy player who I think would be a good fit for their roster. With Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns presumably out the door, they're going to need some depth at center. Ahmed Kabongo would also make sense. I think it would be in the Knicks' best interest to look to extend Jarrett Allen this summer, meaning that Kabongo, who's entering the final year of his deal, also isn't super needed. Alexander Killebrew, one of our second-round picks last year, would also make sense as a flyer. None of the 4 players I just said are technically under contract right now, but they all have team options. Coco Diablo has 2 more years left of team control before he's a restricted free agent, while the other 3 players, Patrick Feinstein, Ahmed Kabongo, and Alexander Killebrew, all have 1 more season with a team option before they enter free agency. So that's going to be the trade that we make. Anthony Edwards and Kyle Anderson to the Knicks for the number 1 pick, Coco Diablo, Patrick Feinstein, Ahmed Kabongo, and Alexander Killebrew. We can't put the players in the deal now until after the team option stage, but realistically, the Timberwolves would make that trade, and I think it's worth it for us. So we're going to keep those 4 players on the roster through the draft and give them to Minnesota afterwards. So we will make the trade. Anthony Edwards is a New York Knick. We no longer have the number 1 pick. That goes to Minnesota, who now has a bunch of pieces of our young core. And it is kind of unfortunate. We've been building our roster around these young guys, and now that a lot of them are gone on a totally different team. And you'd think, presumably, we're not really going to see them or talk about them a whole lot unless we, play the Timberwolves or something. Well, not exactly. I have a twist that I'm excited to reveal with you all. So going forward in this series, we will be taking over the Minnesota Timberwolves. However, we will still be using the New York Knicks. This is still the Knicks series. But now we're going to be controlling the Timberwolves as well. We will be making draft picks for them. We will be making roster moves for them. We may play some games with them. We're going to be controlling 2 teams in this series going forward. This is an idea that I've had in my head kind of since the start of the playoffs last year, and I think it could be really fun. And I know a lot of you guys are probably confused. Why would I do this? I think it kind of makes things interesting. We're switching things up a little bit. We still get to see the development of the young guys who we've drafted now in Minnesota. This is still the Knicks series, and there's still going to be a lot of focus on the Knicks, but we can also still not only watch these guys' development in Minnesota, but we can actively participate in it as well. And we're going to have the ultimate goal of having the Knicks play against the Timberwolves in the NBA Finals down the line. Probably not next year. I don't think Minnesota's good enough, but you never know. So that's my big twist here. We will be controlling both teams going forward. This is still technically the Knicks series, but we will be giving a lot of attention to Minnesota as well. I'm going to experiment with it early this season. If you guys don't like it, we don't have to continue using Minnesota, and we can put all of our focus back onto the Knicks. But I think this could be really fun, and I want to give it a shot, and I want to see your guys' feedback, because I think you're going to enjoy the perspective of both of these teams, especially considering we've kind of finalized our core with the Knicks. So now it's not really about roster building anymore, and it's more about seeing this core winning. So we're still building up a roster in Minnesota with our young players, while still focusing on trying to propel the Knicks to win an NBA championship. Now that we are using the Timberwolves, we're going to start making roster moves for them before this draft, and that starts with trading Karl-Anthony Towns. He has 1 more year left on his deal. I just want to have a clean reset here. Cat is 30. He is starting to regress a little bit. He's not the same player he once was, and I think completely hitting the reset button here in Minnesota is the way to go, building around our number 1 pick and Coco Diablo. This trade from Dallas really intrigues me. Baba Dembele and Dylan Brooks. With Dallas, they're trying to maybe get a star, with Luka probably out the door. So I want to keep that one in mind. Some other interesting offers in here included Trae Young from Atlanta and Tyrese Halliburton from Indiana. But I want to do a deal that's realistic and makes sense for both teams. And I think it could be this one, and I thought about it a little bit. We may come back to this one, but I do want to try to maybe figure something out manually with Karl-Anthony Towns. I wouldn't mind adding a good young player, but I also want to add draft picks. While we have all of our first-round picks going forward, that's it. No second-rounders, no picks from other teams. So I would like to accumulate some additional draft capital if I can. I think the Baltimore Red Tails could be a team who makes sense. They don't really have a starting center. I think Karl-Anthony Towns and Wendell Carter in the front court could be a pretty fun pairing. In terms of draft capital, they had the 7th overall pick this year. I don't think they would trade that for Cat, even though the value says Cat is higher. So I think maybe looking at future picks would make sense, like their pick in 2027. If that was the case, though, I would like to potentially add a player as well. They don't have many intriguing players under contract, but there is one name who kind of tempts me a little bit. Our old friend, Splash Mayo. Splash Mayo spent the first 2 seasons of his career with the Knicks. His stats from 2024-25 didn't save. I don't know why. But he signed a big deal with the Red Tails in the offseason. The Knicks did not match that contract. So now, Splash Mayo is here in Baltimore. He has been a pretty solid player with the Red Tails this season, but I think he'd be a good fit with Minnesota. Bringing him with Coco Diablo and Alonso Corbett, the 3 blue-headed bandits, I think that'd be really fun. So this is the initial trade we're going to offer. Karl-Anthony Towns for Splash Mayo, a top 5 protected pick next year, and 2 future seconds. Baltimore would say no. I decided to take the 2 second-round picks out, so just Splash Mayo and the first-round pick. I offered this deal to the Red Tails, and they said yes. So Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, they are gone. That era in Minnesota is over with. And now the Minnesota Timberwolves, who had the number 1 pick, by the way, have an interesting young core going forward. And keep in mind, we're going to add the guys from the Knicks, Diablo, Feinstein, and Kabongo after the draft. And it's going to be fun following along with a veteran team like the Knicks who are ready to win, while also following along with Minnesota, a young rebuilding team. So those are going to be our 2 trades here going into the draft, both of which involving the Timberwolves. Before we start, though, I do want to take a look at these mock drafts. Now that the Minnesota Timberwolves have the number 1 pick this year, which we will be making that pick, the Knicks, meanwhile, currently have pick 30. So it still says the Knicks are here at pick 1. We'll pretend it's Minnesota just because. So the mock drafts all have Minnesota going with Apollo Thanopoulos, which is a good option. I think Dalen Battle and Khaled Dior are also in play for the number 1 pick. Maybe Minnesota would consider trading down. Diallo or Buddy Johnson would both be good value picks at 4 or 5. So that is always an option for the Timberwolves, who I've said need to accumulate more future draft picks. It seems like most of the mock drafts have chalk early, with Khaled Dior and Dalen Battle going at 2 and 3. As for the Knicks at pick 30, Draft Express has us going in an interesting direction here with Detrick Vez out of Oklahoma. The Sooners have a few pretty good prospects in this draft. 2K has the Timberwolves going with Apollo Thanopoulos. Could he be a good fit with Coco Diablo as the 2 franchise players in Minnesota going forward? Certainly, I think they would complement each other quite well. Is Thanopoulos the best player in the draft, though? That's what Minnesota has to ask themselves. At pick 30, we've got the Knicks going with a draft and stash big man, Larkin Krizepo from Turkey. NBA.com has the Timberwolves going with Thanopoulos, again, if they keep the number 1 pick. Another question that we're going to have to ask ourselves with Minnesota, would it be worth it to keep the number 1 pick or move down to 4 or 5 and get a guy like Diallo or Buddy Johnson, who I think are 80% as good as a guy like Thanopoulos, Battle, or Khaled Dior? And you could get a bunch of future draft picks by moving down just a few spots. They had the Knicks going with Marshawn Papadio from the University of Alabama. I believe he was a player who we had the Knicks invite in for a pre-draft workout, so that could make sense. I know it's been a pretty long episode so far with both of the big trades and obviously the bombshell that we're controlling both of these teams now. But let's finally kick off the 2026 NBA Draft with the Minnesota Timberwolves on the clock. And again, we will be making draft picks for both the Timberwolves and the Knicks going forward. So what is Minnesota going to do here with the number 1 pick? There are a ton of good options here. If they keep the pick, it's got to be one of Thanopoulos, Battle, or Dior. They could always look to move down, try to get a guy like Diallo or Buddy Johnson. Whether we trade this pick or not, we would be wrong to not do our due diligence and see what the price for the number 1 pick would be. As I went through the trade finder, I noticed a lot of these deals were the exact same offers that we had just been offered for Karl-Anthony Towns. And if we're not going to trade Karl-Anthony Towns for these things, then why would we trade the number 1 pick, which is a significantly better asset? So I did some digging with the Raptors and the Wizards at picks 4 and 5. Both teams have multiple first-round picks this year along with other assets. This was the one offer we got from the Raptors. It would include Kevon Patterson Jr., a first-round pick last year, which isn't a horrible offer. And then I looked here at the Wizards, and they'd be willing to throw in Clint Capella, a talented starting caliber center. I would rather acquire more picks, though, and I really thought about this. Picks 5, 11, and a future first next year from the Wizards for the number 1 pick. But ultimately, I decided not to do it, and we will keep the number 1 selection in Minnesota. So that crosses Diallo and Buddy Johnson off the list, and it really comes down to 3. The first option is Apollo Thanopoulos, who is the chalky pick here and the player everybody would expect us to pick. Thanopoulos is 7'1", 260 pounds, and before we go any further, this is not Victor Wembanyama. Vic is 7'5", he can handle and shoot the ball. That's not Thanopoulos. He's more of a big-time threat within the interior who is a dominant force. You've got Dalen Battle, the all-around guard out of the University of Kentucky, who I think is going to be the most ready to go right away in order to help winning. And then you have Khalil Dior from La Lumiere High School. He's one of the youngest players in the draft, and this is somebody who's got a sky-high ceiling, probably more long-term upside than both Thanopoulos and Battle. Do you go with the player who's the most ready, the player with the highest ceiling, or arguably the best big man prospect in the draft? With the first pick in the 2026 NBA Draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Apollo Thanopoulos, a center from Greece. He most recently played for Olympiakos, which is in the Greek Basket League. So Apollo Thanopoulos is the pick here to Minnesota, coming in as an 80 overall. This is a dominant threat within the interior. He is a phenomenal inside scorer. He's a phenomenal interior defender, good rebounder, and he's got an NBA-level body at 7'1", 260 pounds with grown man strength. He took the basketball world by storm in the FIBA Under-19 World Championships last summer. He dominated in the quarterfinals against Mexico. In the semifinals against China, he was a force down low on both ends of the floor. And then in the championship game against the United States, a team with 6 or 7 future lottery picks, he carried Greece to the win with 23 points, 25 rebounds, and 8 blocks, including this one right here late in the fourth quarter. I think what really is going to entice teams about Thanopoulos is his athleticism at his size. He's very quick for someone who's 7'1", 260 pounds. He is a man amongst men. He's a pretty good playmaker for his size. He doesn't have much of an outside game yet, but he's working on it. The jump shot has really improved over the last year or so, and he is very mobile defensively. He can switch onto the perimeter when need be. The Minnesota Timberwolves found out that they were going to get the number 1 pick just days before the draft. They were able to quickly get Thanopoulos in for a visit, and were really impressed with him, certainly enough so to take him here number 1 overall. Of the candidates with this pick, I think Thanopoulos is by far the best long-term fit with Coco Diablo, who's more of a ball-dominant guard. Diablo and Thanopoulos should be big cornerstones for the Timberwolves going forward. With the second pick, the Los Angeles Clippers select Khalid Dior from La Lumiere High School. Dior is one of the youngest players in the draft, but he has a super high ceiling, and I think this is the right choice for the Clippers, who need a generational talent to ignite their franchise, and I think Khalid Dior is more likely to be that for them than anybody in this year's draft class. If you look at what the Clippers have been over the last few years, it's very mediocre. The Paul George and Kawhi Leonard thing came to a halting end. They had their experiment with Jaylen Brown and DeMar DeRozan. Didn't really work out. They tried out Anthony Simons here. Didn't really work out. He's obviously now in Minnesota. They still have Jaylen Brown, but they really need somebody who can be a superstar for them. And Khalid Dior, I think, can be just that. With the third pick, the New Orleans Pelicans select Dalen Battle out of the University of Kentucky. A very easy choice for New Orleans, and I think of the top 3 prospects, Battle is probably the best fit for New Orleans, so it really works out well for all of these teams picking at the top. The Pelicans just won the NBA championship last year, so for them to add a talent like Battle is pretty frightening. I think Dalen Battle is the most ready-to-go pro in this draft, and he has a super high floor. He's a combo guard who's a good playmaker. He's a good all-around scorer, pretty good defender, and he's got good basketball IQ for his age. I'm not sure he's ever going to be a superstar like possibly Thanopoulos or Khalid Dior, but I think he's a perfect fit on a contending team like the Pelicans, and he still has plenty of room to grow and could be an all-star for them down the line. Apparently, the media thinks he's a second-round talent. I want whatever crack they're on. What a horrible take. With the number 4 pick, the Toronto Raptors select Jaron Cinco. He's an American-born player currently playing for Real Madrid. So a very interesting pick here by Toronto. I know I've said that Buddy Johnson and Diallo are probably the guys who belong here at picks 4 and 5, but I actually like this pick for Toronto because I think Cinco not only has more long-term upside, but he's a better fit for their roster, and he's not that much worse as a prospect. The Raptors are a wing-oriented team. Their 2 building blocks right now are Scotty Barnes and Franz Wagner. I think both Diallo and Buddy Johnson kind of take away from what those two bring to the table, whereas Cinco is more of a pure complement as a big 6'8" guard. With the 5th pick, the Washington Wizards select Diallo from the University of Miami. Good pick here for the Wizards. They got their choice between Diallo and Johnson, and they're going to go with Diallo, who's a super well-rounded player. If you look at his player card, there are A's and B's across the board. He has no weaknesses to his game. The Washington Wizards had themselves a pretty nice core, I'm not going to lie. They've got some good players on this roster, and the Wizards have another lottery pick. This selection is actually from the Dallas Mavericks, keep in mind, who obviously are in a lot of trouble, put it that way. Abdoulaye Oshefu is the 6th overall pick, going to the Miami Heat. A little bit of a surprise here. This is the first pick that I didn't really see coming. I would have expected it to have been Buddy Johnson, but instead they're going to go with Oshefu, who dominated this year, albeit against weaker competition. But he's going to be a really good player going forward for the Miami Heat. Somebody who can score from all 3 levels, good playmaker, good defender. He's going to be their Tyler Hero replacement, who of course was traded at the deadline to the Eastern Conference champion Boston Celtics. So this scenario really works out well for Baltimore, who has the 7th pick. You'd think they'd go with Buddy Johnson, but they don't. They actually pick Pasquale Baccaro, the 2nd player out of the University of Kentucky, off the board. Baccaro is a big Italian forward with shades of Paolo Banchero's game. They're both built similarly and have pretty similar skill sets. Maybe Baccaro isn't necessarily the athlete or the shot creator that, say, Paolo is, but he's not too far off as a prospect. I will say the Red Tails do have a lot of bigs on their team, so I'm not sure how they're going to manage it. That'll bring up the Spurs here at 8. Buddy Johnson's still on the board, but they've got a lot of wings already on their roster. So both the Timberwolves and the Knicks are going to be on the phone here with the Spurs. The one weird thing about controlling 2 teams is that we might be trying to trade up for the same player, presumably Buddy Johnson, who should not be on the board here at 8. But I will say, probably half the league would be on the phone right now with the Spurs, so it doesn't really matter. The Spurs would not answer the Timberwolves call, and they would not answer the Knicks call. So clearly they don't want to do this deal. But I came up with an idea, a 3-team deal with the Knicks and the Pelicans, which would send the 8th overall pick to New York. So this is my idea. R.J. Barrett goes to New Orleans. Raymond Robinson, their first-round pick last year, goes to the Spurs. And the Knicks would get the 8th pick, and both teams accept. That was easy. So a pretty shocking trade goes down to put the Knicks on the clock as the R.J. Barrett Knicks era comes to a close after 7 years. I'm really appreciative for what R.J. Barrett was able to provide us in this series. I know a lot of people wanted us to trade R.J. Barrett, but I always saw the value in his role as a guy who's a good shooter off the catch, plays good defense, an improving playmaker, but with the addition of Anthony Edwards, I just don't really think we need RJ anymore. He gets to team up with his buddy Zion Williamson in New Orleans. That's going to be a scary duo going forward. I think RJ Barrett's going to be the number 2 scoring option for the Pelicans, so I would expect him to put up pretty good numbers there with his buddy Zion Williamson. Raymond Robinson goes to the Spurs. He gives them more playmaking. They do already have some pretty good guards who have good playmaking ratings, but Buzz Wigginton barely passes the ball. And Davion Mitchell's a guy you don't want on the floor too long because of his size, so he can be a little bit of a mismatch in certain situations. So you got a guy like Raymond Robinson who's a big playmaker. He averaged 11 and 6 last year for the NBA champion Pelicans. I think he's a Greg Popovich type of guy. He's a really smart player for his age, and I think they would prefer him as opposed to a guy like Buddy Johnson or one of the other prospects on the board. So that brings the Knicks up here at 8. New York was supposed to pick in this range originally, but with the Raptors pick jumping in the top 4, it doesn't happen. Presumably, Buddy Johnson would be the player they're trading up for. There are some other good players here on the board, however, who the Knicks could consider, and maybe they're a little bit scared off by Buddy Johnson slipping, and there's another player they're looking to trade up for, like a Vincent Cherrytree or an Obadiah Washington. With the 8th pick in the 2026 NBA Draft, the New York Knicks select Buddy Johnson out of the University of Florida. I was trying to hype the pickup just now and make it suspenseful, but it's pretty obvious Buddy Johnson was the guy here for the New York Knicks. They trade away R.J. Barrett and they acquire Buddy Johnson, and you can make the argument, why would the Knicks trade away a player in R.J. Barrett on the wing just to get a worse, younger wing? Well, my thought process here is that R.J. Barrett is probably going to have a smaller role with the addition of Anthony Edwards. So rather than have R.J. Barrett come off the bench, why not get a guy like Buddy Johnson who can still give you meaningful minutes right away as a rookie, but can also be a player who's developed with a higher ceiling in the long term. He is aggressive and tough in transition. Off the catch, as a shooter, he is phenomenal. I think his shooting ability and solid defense projects very well to the next level, and that's why he's going to be able to contribute for the Knicks as a rookie. He is an aggressive, tough, physical player, and he wasn't a highly heralded recruit. He wasn't really on anybody's radars coming out of high school. He wasn't super highly ranked on the AAU circuit, and he didn't go to a big-time program. Instead, he went JUCO for a year, dominated, transferred to the University of Florida as a sophomore, where he proceeded to win the SEC Player of the Year coming out of nowhere, leading Florida to an Elite 8 spot. I really like his ability here to shoot the ball, to play defense, to play make, and you can make the argument that he kind of came out of nowhere, so that's a little bit weird. But the way I see it is this is an ascending player who has shown drastic improvement over the last 2 years, and I don't see any reason why he won't keep that up. He really impressed us during his pre-draft workout, and one of the reasons why I was comfortable with trading the number 1 pick away was that given the opportunity with a guy like him falling, we could always move up and get him. And I think he's 80% of the prospect that, say, Apollo Thanopoulos is. So I think this really worked out well for the Knicks. I'm going to miss R.J. Barrett, but look, I think we're getting somebody in the long term who's going to be even better. With the 9th pick, the Philadelphia 76ers select Brandon Bridges from Italy. We know a thing or two about picking Italian point guards in this range, obviously selecting Cesar DiCarlo 11th overall 3 years ago, and now Brandon Bridges here enters our division. Trayshawn Reeves out of Villanova is the 10th pick to the Miami Heat. They already drafted Abdoulaye Oshefu 6th overall. The Heat are really focused on building a young team up with their draft picks rather than going all out in acquiring stars. The Washington Wizards select Abayeze Chitachi, the 7'3" center out of LSU. Chitachi's a very solid player. He's a little bit rough around the edges, but he's a dominant force down low. He doesn't really provide a whole lot offensively, and he's a lot more raw in that area than a guy like Apollo Thanopoulos, who obviously was the number 1 pick. Obadiah Washington goes 12 to the Sacramento Kings. He entered the season as a projected top 5 pick. He disappointed a little bit, but he still ends up going in the lottery. The Kings are banking on his shot creation ability and his all-around game. With the 13th pick, the Portland Trailblazers select Mateo Riggs, who most recently played for the Overtime Elite program. Overtime Elite has done a good job of bringing new prospects to the NBA each year. Riggs is a 6'7" combo guard who is a phenomenal playmaker, defender, and improving scorer. With the 14th pick, the Golden State Warriors select Vincent Cherrytree from Notre Dame. I think the Warriors still want to win with these guys like Stephen Curry, even though he's getting a little bit older. Cherrytree's going to be able to produce right away. He's a phenomenal defender, and he's very versatile on that end of the floor as he can guard down low and switch on at the perimeter. The Utah Jazz select James Danielson out of Duke. A big-time shot creator will join the Jazz, and he is a perfect fit here for a number of reasons. I think he kind of fits what they're trying to build with their guards, but also their fans are really going to like him. He's going to be a fan favorite here in Utah for, well, obvious Utah reasons. With the 16th pick, the Memphis Grizzlies select Amonte Stewart out of Kansas. The Jayhawk joins the Memphis Grizzlies. Stewart's stock has risen throughout the year. I thought he was going to go earlier than this, possibly in the top 10, but he doesn't go as high as expected. Still ends up being the final pick here of the lottery. The Toronto Raptors select Monsieur Maddock out of New Zealand. 7'5", 305 pounds. He is a large human being. He's a little bit raw. His defense could use some work offensively. He's not the best, but the Raptors are banking on his physical upside of being their long-term center. The Indiana Pacers select I.K. Yunston IV out of Xavier. I think this is a really good fit here for the Pacers. Yunston is an all-around player with no major weaknesses to his game, and he's going to make their team better. This is a guy who's going to be able to get rotation minutes right away as a rookie. The Knicks were hoping he would fall to 30, but unfortunately that does not happen. The Houston Rockets at 19 select B.J. Island Jr. from Haiti. Island is one of the youngest players in the draft. I don't think there are many guys left who the Rockets think will be able to give them early minutes, so they're going to go for a more developmental prospect. We've got a trade here at pick 20, as the Milwaukee Bucks will be trading Patrick Williams to the Los Angeles Clippers to acquire this selection, and they will pick Armando Vespucci from Italia. So the Clippers add a veteran piece in Patrick Williams, who probably has more value than this selection, while the Bucks are going all out on their rebuild, and I don't blame them. They need to get younger, and Vespucci's a good pick here. Colby Mead out of Vermont is the 21st pick to the Philadelphia 76ers. He's a 6'4" forward who gives them what they like about PJ Tucker, but he has more of an offensive-oriented game, and he can actually shoot the ball. Alfonso Anderson out of Alabama is the 22nd pick to the Magic. Anderson's an all-around player with no major weaknesses to his game. He was another guy who the Knicks were hoping would fall to 30, but unfortunately it doesn't happen. Rogerio Micht out of Brazil is the 23rd pick to the Phoenix Suns. Entering the season, Micht looked like a top 5 pick. His stock plummeted after a very disappointing season, but the Suns are going to take a chance on him and hope it pays off. Marshawn Papadio out of Alabama is the 24th pick to the Los Angeles Lakers. He was another guy who we were kind of hoping would fall to 30. There are still some guys that the Knicks like enough to pick with the selection, but some of these guys are starting to fall. At pick 25, the Bucks are making another trade. Chris Middleton is on the move to San Antonio along with a future first for 25 and 61. So the Spurs did not want Buddy Johnson earlier, but they do want Chris Middleton. I really think they're trying to win games with Greg Popovich getting older and probably in one of the final seasons as a coach. So rather than getting rookies, they're getting proven vets. Lucas Alba, meanwhile, out of Syracuse is the selection of Milwaukee. I like what the Bucks are doing. Just tear it down, start the rebuild, and continue to get young players. Axel Syverson from Denmark is the pick to the Charlotte Hornets. The big, egg-headed forward should be a nice addition here for Charlotte. They're trying to continue to get players who complement LaMelo Ball and Zach LaVine, and I think Syverson can do that down low. Commander Brown out of Duke goes to the Boston Celtics, a 6'9" forward who plays bigger than his size suggests. He should be able to give Boston some more physicality down low. Chris Williams out of Memphis goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder here at 28. This is the only pick that OKC owns in this entire draft. Their stash of picks is up. They've got their core together, but they do add Chris Williams, a talented young scorer. And then the Detroit Pistons select Braden Denizio from Duke University with the 29th pick. Denizio won't provide a lot as a scorer, but the rest of this game is really solid, and the Pistons are hoping that his playmaking and defense will be able to contribute early on as a rookie. So that'll bring up the New York Knicks here at pick 30. This is the last pick that either the Knicks or the Timberwolves own today for now, and I think the board did play out pretty well for us. There were some guys who I liked who were picked, but there's still 4 players who we had invited for pre-draft workouts: Uzier Stone-Shaw, Isaiah Dumas, Tyshawn Hamilton, and Vinicius Correa. While there are multiple players who I would feel good about picking here, again, I do want to take a look at the trade finder, and we got some really good offers, including Jared Vanderbilt. I probably would have taken this deal if we had not just acquired Kyle Anderson. All the other trades ended up being really solid as well, and I actually thought about some of these, but I feel like a lot of these trades would be fleeces. This is a 1-star draft pick, and we can get multiple future first-round picks. We can get multiple good role players, so I think the fair thing to do would be to just keep the pick and draft one of the young rookies who I'm high on long term. So that's what we're going to do. There are some players who were not supposed to fall here, like Isu Odu, Detrick Vez, Brandon King, all good options. And again, Uziel Stone-Shaw, Isaiah Dumas, Tyshawn Hamilton, and Vinicius Correa were players who we invited in for workouts, all of whom we really like. They all have differing skill sets and could each be good fits for our roster going forward. So will the Knicks go for one of the players who they had in for a workout, or will they go for a surprise? With the 30th pick in the 2026 NBA draft, the New York Knicks select Isu Odu from Egypt. We did not have Odu in for a workout, but he has a really intriguing skill set, and I think he could be a good long-term fit on this roster. The reason why we did not invite him for a workout was because I thought there was no realistic way we were going to get him. I didn't think we were going to obviously consider him in the top 5, and I also did not see a world where he would fall to 30. He falls here to 30, and we will capitalize. Odu is an intriguing player who can do everything pretty well, and I think he'll be a good role player on a team like the Knicks. I'm not sure how often he's going to play as a rookie, but I do like his long-term fit here. Odu's a solid all-around player. He's got the playmaking ability of a point guard despite being a 6'6" wing, and I think his passing might be his best all-around attribute. He's a very good defensive player as well. He's tough, he's physical, and his goal is to make life hell for whoever he's guarding. The big question with his game is shooting, and it's not that he's a bad shooter, but he's got pretty ugly shot mechanics. His release is kind of slow, and it starts very low towards his chest. He doesn't really know how to create his own shot on the dribble, but he's very good at navigating through screens and getting himself open. He is an efficient shooter, so while it looks ugly, the shot goes in, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Isaiah Dumas out of Creighton is the next pick here to the Magic. He was one of the guys we kind of liked in this range as an option for us, but with Odu slipping to us, Dumas is obviously not our pick, and he will go to the Magic, the son of former Sonic Chance Dumas. With the final pick in the first round, the Milwaukee Bucks select Darion Quinn from Gonzaga. We were a little bit more intrigued by the other Gonzaga guard, Uziel Stone-Shaw, but I like Darion Quinn as well, and I think he's a pretty good pick here for the Bucks. He's one of the youngest players in the entire draft, and I like his upside for Milwaukee long term. So there's your first round. Apollo Thanopoulos ends up being the number 1 pick. The Knicks trade R.J. Barrett for the 8th pick and draft Buddy Johnson out of Florida. It is worth noting there were a few players drafted after Johnson who actually have higher ratings than him. Obadiah Washington and Vincent Cherrytree are both 77 overalls, whereas Johnson is a 76, but I still think that was a good move by the Knicks, who also picked Isu Odu, the Egyptian forward, with the 30th overall pick. As of now, neither Minnesota or the Knicks have a second-round pick, so we're going to try to breeze through round 2 pretty quickly, unless one of those teams has a guy they like who falls and potentially trades up. Vinicius Correa goes to the Miami Heat. Uziel Stone-Shaw goes to the Chicago Bulls. All of the other players we considered with the Knicks picks are going very early here in the second round. The only guy left would have been Tyshawn Hamilton, and he's the very next pick to the Memphis Grizzlies. Larkin Crespo is the pick to the Orlando Magic. So at this point, we know the Knicks probably are not going to trade up. All the guys they like are gone. But the Minnesota Timberwolves do have a few players who they invited for pre-draft workouts who are still on the board. So maybe the Timberwolves make a move if one of those guys slip. The Atlanta Hawks select Crispy Beard out of Gonzaga. He was one of the 4 players who Minnesota had in for a workout. Samuel Risco goes off the board to the Miami Heat. Walter Cart out of Houston goes to the Orlando Magic. The Miami Heat at pick 40 select Jeremy Allen from Syracuse. The New York guard heads to Miami. The Heat have drafted a ton of guards today. Jaden Barnett out of Duke goes to the Wizards. Elijah Richardson to the Hawks, another player who Minnesota had in for a pre-draft workout. The Toronto Raptors select Detrick Vez out of Oklahoma. The Atlanta Hawks select Nikhil Bourbon from Auburn, one of my favorite players here in this second round. I really like his upside. Darson Harrison Smith, the 6'9" guard out of Michigan State, goes to Toronto. The Sacramento Kings select Wesley Klein, a forward out of Minnesota. Jack Turkey, gobble gobble, out of Turkey, gobble gobble, goes to the Atlanta Hawks, who have a bazillion second rounders. The Cleveland Cavaliers select Clarence Cheeks. They're hoping that he will not be Cheeks. We're about halfway through the second round now as the Atlanta Hawks select Ronan Hagiwara, a 7-foot center out of UCLA. I think that's the Hawks' 4th second-round pick they've made. The Brooklyn Nets select Haas McGraw, a 6'10" forward out of UConn. Stanley is probably so happy to be the pick to the Golden State Warriors. George Costello goes to the Lakers, another player who Minnesota had in for a pre-draft workout. I think all the guys who Minnesota had in for workouts are now off the board. D'Angelo Miles out of USC goes to the Denver Nuggets. The Phoenix Suns select Ricky Matthew, a 7'1" center out of Texas Tech. Taibu Akika from Hawaii goes to the Orlando Magic. About 10 more picks to go now as Miami Heat select Brandon King out of Gonzaga. The Heat have had 6 picks today, and they've drafted 6 guards. Dorian Dipree, a high schooler, goes to the Jazz. He did not have as much luck being a high pick compared to fellow high schooler Khalid Dior. Tyler Dean is off the board out of Purdue to the Sonics. Kenji Kamada to the Hornets, a 7'5" center. He can handle the ball and shoot it, more like Victor Wembanyama. The problem is the rest of his game is not very good. That's why he ended up being the 59th pick rather than the first pick, but the Hornets do like his upside. At pick 60, the Boston Celtics select Shakhtar Donetsk, a 7'2", 250-pound big man. The Milwaukee Bucks are up next. They've had a bunch of picks today as they go with Vladimir Pygzayo, a 6-foot point guard from Australia. I'm 100% sure I butchered his last name. Ezra Day out of Arizona State, a 6'7" guard, is off the board to the Orlando Magic. 2 more picks to go. We'll start with the Milwaukee Bucks here at 63 as they select Jason Carter Jr., a 7'3", 290-pound big man. And with the final pick, the Houston Rockets select Orion Jones, the Western Kentucky Hilltopper. So there you go. That is the second round of the NBA draft. The Knicks and Timberwolves do not make any picks here because all of the guys we kind of liked were picked super early, so there was really no reason to move up and take a flyer on somebody. Rather, we're going to have both teams stand pat with their drafts. Still got some good players here going in the second round who I think could be pretty solid down the line, especially some of the guys picked early, and there were some interesting players down the board. Some guys who do have long-term upside with their teams who could end up being complete diamonds in the roughs for their respective squads. Let's take a look at each team's draft individually now before we wrap things up. The Sixers with 2 first-round picks get Brandon Bridges and Colby Mead. The Bucks with 5 picks. They're going all out within their rebuild, including 3 first-rounders, getting Vespucci, Alba, and Quinn. 3 pretty good picks for them. The Bulls add Uziel Stone-Shaw, good value in the second round. Clarence Cheeks to Cleveland. The Celtics with 2 solid picks. The Clippers add Khalid Dior. The Grizzlies had a good draft. The Hawks had 6 second-rounders, although one of them is a draft and stash player from last year, but they still had 5 twos. The Heat drafts 6 players, all of whom are guards. I guess guard is the big weakness on their roster, so that's one way to address it. Charlotte adds some size. The Jazz add some scoring with Danielson and Dipree. Obadiah Washington, interesting pick to the Kings. Obviously, the Knicks added Buddy Johnson and Isu Odu, 2 players I'm really excited about with our team going forward. After them, we had the Los Angeles Lakers with Joel Embiid and Giannis. They add Marshawn Papadio along with George Costello and a draft and stash player from last year. The Magic with a lot of picks. They had 6 selections. 2 of their guys are going to be draft and stash guys for a year in Europe. The Mavs had no picks. The Nets add a couple players, including a draft and stash guy from last year. D'Angelo Miles to the Nuggets. I.K. Youngston to the Pacers. Dalen Battle to New Orleans. I really like that fit for the Pelicans with Zion and R.J. Barrett. Denizio to the Pistons. The Raptors had Jaron Cinco along with 3 other players. I thought Toronto had a pretty good draft. The Rockets add B.J. Island. We'll see if they can develop him. The Spurs have no picks as they're trying to win a lot of games this year. Rogerio Mish to the Suns, Chris Williams, and a foreign draft and stash player to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The Timberwolves only had 1 pick, and they go with Apollo Thanopoulos, the big man. Mateo Riggs goes to the Trailblazers. Vincent Cherrytree I thought was a really good pick in the middle of the first round by the Warriors. I like the Wizards draft with Diallo. Pascual Baccaro to the Red Tails. That was an interesting pick. And then the Sonics only had 1 selection. They went with Tyler Dean. So that is our draft. We will go through the team and player options stage now because there are some guys on team options for the Knicks who are about to get traded. So we're going to do that now. We're going to accept all the team options for both teams. For the Knicks, it's like half the roster. So just a reminder, it's Coco Diablo, Patrick Feinstein, Ahmed Kabanko, and Alexander Killebrew going to Minnesota. I swapped draft picks and then re-swapped them. So now all 4 players are on the Timberwolves. This is a really interesting core Minnesota has as we cross off Simons and Gobert, who are both free agents. But this is a good group of players. Thanopoulos, Corbett, McDaniels, Diablo, Kabango, Mayo, and Feinstein as the core 7 players who we're going to build around with Minnesota. And as for the Knicks, Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards will be the dynamic duo. We get to keep DJ Ramses along with multiple other young players. So I think both the Timberwolves and the Knicks are going to be in interesting spots here as we go through free agency and wrapped up the offseason in the next episode, making signings for both teams. Let me know what you thought of this draft down below in the comments. Let me know what you thought of the Anthony Edwards deal. Let me know what you think of my idea of us using the Timberwolves going forward. I'm excited to experiment with that throughout the season. And again, if you guys don't like it, we can just go back to focusing on the Knicks. But I think it will be really fun to also focus on Minnesota. That'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.